The HOA president is banging on my gate, screaming that I've stolen her lake. Behind her, 40 seniors in matching t-shirts are chanting something about property rights. A sheriff's deputy stands between us, looking annoyed. And me? I'm holding a stack of federal documents and smiling. Because 6 weeks ago, this woman, Patricia, called 911 on me for owning a lake. My lake. The one I bought fair and square for $220,000. She claimed her HOA had perpetual access rights, and I was a criminal for putting up a gate. She threatened me, vandalized my property, tried to destroy me in court. Now her entire neighborhood is locked out. Her legal bills just bankrupted the HOA, and I'm about to teach her that federal waterway law doesn't care how long you've been trespassing. The smell of her desperation is almost as strong as her floral perfume. Ever had an HOA make your life hell? Tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from? Please say somewhere without HOAs. My name's Garrett Sullivan, 47 years old, union electrician, and recently divorced from a woman who decided our 18-year marriage was limiting her spiritual growth. Translation: she found a yoga instructor with better abs and a trust fund. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. Sometimes you find treasure down there. My Uncle Ray passed away last spring and left me $250,000 with one piece of advice. Garrett, never trust a handshake deal, especially when rich folks are involved. So when I found 14 acres with a pristine spring-fed lake for $220,000, I didn't just buy it. I hired 3 inspectors, 2 surveyors, and spent $2,000 on title research. The smell of clean water and pine trees during my first visit was better than any therapy session. This would be my sanctuary, fishing at dawn, building cedar furniture, and pretending my ex-wife never existed. The property sits smack in the middle of Willowbrook Estates, where houses cost $450,000 to $900,000 and residents drive golf carts to check their mailboxes. These are corporate retirees who complain when the country club raises dues $50 but spend $800 on weekend wine tastings. Then I met Patricia Blackwood. Patricia's 64, HOA president for 6 years, and drives a pearl-white Cadillac Escalade with vanity plates reading Ho Prez, former insurance claims adjuster, which explains her supernatural ability to find fault with everything. Her husband Randolph sits on county zoning, giving her political juice that would make a small-town mayor jealous. She writes violation letters that run 23 pages. I counted. The woman once fined someone for excessive seasonal decoration because they left Christmas lights up until January 2nd. Her perfume, some aggressive floral assault that smells like a funeral home explosion, announces her arrival from 3 blocks away. Day 3. After moving in, I'm installing a small fishing dock when I hear the distinctive crunch of expensive tires on gravel. Patricia emerges from her Escalade like a general inspecting troops, 5 board members trailing behind like nervous puppies. That structure violates community aesthetic standards, she announced, consulting her ever-present clipboard. I looked up from my drill, sweat dripping in the Missouri summer heat. Ma'am, this is my property. Got the deed inside if you want to see it. Visual harmony is paramount in waterfront communities, she said, like she was reading from some HOA scripture. Remove it immediately or face $200 daily fines. Now I'm union. I've negotiated with corporate lawyers and plant managers who'd sell their mothers for quarterly bonuses. But something about her tone, like she was scolding a kindergartner, made my blood pressure spike. I'm not removing jack squat. My land, my lake, my dock. That's when Patricia did something that still amazes me. She pulled out her phone and called 911. Actually dialed emergency services while staring me down like I was holding a weapon instead of a cordless drill. Yes, I need police, she said into the phone, voice dripping with theatrical concern. Aggressive trespasser threatening community safety. Very unstable individual. Deputy Mike Morrison arrived 20 minutes later, looking like he'd rather be directing traffic. Patricia launched into an Oscar-worthy performance about dangerous newcomers while I stood there holding my property deed and wondering if I'd accidentally moved to Crazy Town. Ma'am, Morrison said after examining my paperwork. He owns this property fair and square. He can build whatever he wants. Patricia's face went through several interesting color changes. But lake access, we have grandfathered rights. The HOAs collected maintenance fees for 12 years, and there it was. The confession that changed everything. This HOA had been charging residents $600 annually for exclusive lake access and maintenance for 12 years on my property. That's over $84,000 in fees for land they didn't own. Patricia knew it. The board knew it. They'd built their entire community amenity package around stealing my lake. The taste of that revelation was sweeter than Uncle Ray's bourbon. Patricia didn't waste time licking her wounds. 3 days after Deputy Morrison left, she was back with reinforcements and a strategy that would have impressed a war college graduate. She'd hired her surveyor cousin, because nothing says objective assessment like keeping it in the family, to create what she called a corrected boundary evaluation. According to this masterpiece of creative cartography, my fishing dock extended 3 whole feet into something called an HOA conservation easement. The smell of fresh ink on that survey was still strong when she waved it in my face like a battle flag. "This is formal trespass notice," she announced. "Your illegal structure violates our environmental protection zone." I almost choked on my coffee. Environmental protection zone? That's a patch of poison ivy and beer cans your residents have been dumping there for years. But Patricia was painting a bigger picture. She'd filed formal complaints with the county sheriff and started her whisper campaign at the country club. Mentally unstable newcomer, she told anyone who'd listen. Aggressive tendencies. Property values in serious jeopardy. Here's where Uncle Ray's paranoia paid off. He'd always said, "When someone shows you a survey, get your own survey." So I dropped $3,000 on Thompson and Associates, the kind of surveyors who testify in federal court and have more credentials than a NASA mission specialist. 2 weeks later, I got results that made my day, my week, and probably my entire year. Not only was my dock completely on my property, but the HOA had some fascinating boundary issues. Their community gazebo with the fancy copper roof, my land. The stone barbecue area where they hosted wine tastings, my land. The boat launch they'd been charging $600 per year to access, also my land. But the real Christmas morning moment? Patricia's own backyard deck, that expensive cedar masterpiece she'd probably bragged about to her garden club, extended 8 beautiful feet onto my property. I filed counter-trespass notices against all 7 board members, including Patricia. The look on her face when Deputy Morrison served those papers was like watching someone realize they'd been playing poker with marked cards, and they weren't the one marking them. Uncle Ray had taught me something about property law during those long fishing trips. He'd dealt with a similar situation in the 70s when a neighbor tried claiming part of his driveway through something called adverse possession. "Squatters can steal your land if they use it openly for 20 years, he'd explained, but only if you never object in writing. Always get professional surveys and always object officially. That lesson just saved me about $50,000 in legal headaches. But my survey revealed something even better. The HOA's annual Lake Heritage Festival, their crown jewel event where they charged vendors $500 per booth and residents $50 for premium parking, was entirely on my property. Every tent, every food truck, every overpriced craft station. Patricia had built her social empire on land she didn't own. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered when I showed up at her door with the survey results. The distant sound of kids splashing in her lake mixed with the mechanical hum of expensive sprinkler systems. "We've invested 12 years building this community. One person can't destroy everything we've worked for." "Funny thing about investments," I said, savoring every syllable. "Sometimes you find out you've been gambling with house money that wasn't yours to begin with." Patricia's retaliation came swift and predictable. A concerned resident's petition appeared overnight with 47 signatures demanding my removal for community safety. She started driving surveillance missions past my property twice daily, photographing everything with a telephoto lens like I was running a meth lab instead of building a fishing dock. Anonymous tips flooded the building inspector about my dangerous construction practices. Curious how those calls always traced back to Willowbrook Estates phone numbers. Local contractors began getting friendly calls. "We'd hate to lose your business over one troublemaker," Patricia would coo. The HOA represents significant ongoing revenue for qualified professionals who understand community standards. But I had an ace she didn't know about. Wesley, Uncle Ray's old fishing buddy and retired courthouse clerk, had given me a box of papers that Uncle Ray had saved for 40 years. Government letters, old surveys, correspondence that looked boring until you understood what you were reading. "Your uncle was obsessed with that lake," Wesley told me over coffee that could have stripped paint. Always claimed there were federal complications Patricia's grandmother never told her family about. What kind of complications? Wesley's grin was pure mischief, the kind that make local property disputes look like kindergarten playground arguments. As Patricia escalated her campaign, I started digging through Uncle Ray's papers, really studying them. And what I found would make Patricia's boundary problems look like a minor inconvenience. But first, she had bigger guns to bring out. Patricia's next assault proved she'd graduated from amateur hour to full psychological warfare. If property lines wouldn't work, she'd choke me with red tape until I begged for mercy. The utilities war started Monday morning. My electrical hookup got delayed for enhanced safety protocols. Funny how those protocols didn't exist until Patricia made some phone calls. When I cranked up my backup generator at 3 p.m., noise complaints flooded the sheriff's office faster than water through a broken dam. Excessive mechanical disturbance during community rest periods, Patricia announced to Deputy Morrison, waving her phone like she'd recorded a jet engine. The acrid smell of diesel exhaust mixed with her aggressive floral perfume. Ode to funeral home meets construction site. Ma'am, Morrison sighed. Quiet hours are 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. It's the middle of the afternoon. Noise pollution is noise pollution, she declared with the confidence of someone who'd never worked a real job. But Patricia was just getting started. Her husband Randolph began flexing his zoning board muscles, turning my simple cabin permits into a bureaucratic maze that would have impressed Soviet administrators. Every form needed 3 more forms. Every approval required 4 more inspections. That's when Uncle Ray's self-reliance lessons kicked in. Instead of groveling to utility companies, I went full off-grid. Solar panels, industrial battery bank, enough power to run a small factory. Patricia's harassment accidentally forced me into energy independence I'd never planned, but I wasn't playing defense anymore. I started researching my zoning rights, and what I discovered made Christmas morning look disappointing. Agricultural and recreational zoning meant I could build a commercial fishing operation, guest cabins, boat rentals, RV hookups, the whole 9 yards. I applied for permits to build 6 guest cabins, a bait shop, and commercial marina. Then I planted signs around the property. Future Sullivan's Fishing Lodge and RV Park, grand opening spring 2024, bass tournaments welcome. The screech of Patricia's Escalade brakes when she spotted those signs could have awakened the dead. Here's where things got interesting. My solar installation caught attention from Missouri River Environmental Alliance. Dr. Sarah Remy called personally, offering $50,000 in grants for expanding renewable energy education programs. Sustainable ecotourism with environmental education, she said. We've been searching for exactly this partnership. Patricia's horror was visible from space. Her quiet retirement paradise was about to become Bass Boat Central, complete with weekend fishing tournaments, RV families, and educational tours explaining solar power while she tried hosting wine tastings. Uncle Ray had drilled into me the beauty of right-to-farm laws during our fishing trips. If your land was agricultural before suburbia showed up, he'd explained while untangling my line for the 100th time, suburbia has to deal with your farming, not the other way around. That protection just became my legal fortress against every noise complaint Patricia could manufacture. You cannot seriously plan to operate a commercial lodge, Patricia cornered me at my mailbox, her voice hitting notes that could crack glass. This is an exclusive residential community. Actually, I said, savoring her panic like fine bourbon, this is agricultural land that got surrounded by McMansions. Completely different legal situation. Her face cycled through colors I didn't know human skin could produce. We'll destroy you in court. Community standards. Don't override county zoning laws, I finished. But thanks for the free marketing with all those petition drives. Nothing advertises a fishing lodge better than neighborhood controversy. Patricia's surveillance operation went full CIA. Security cameras appeared on her roof, all pointed at my property. Anonymous health department complaints multiplied about my septic system. She launched whisper campaigns against contractors, warning them about the unstable property owner disrupting community values. But some tactics spectacularly backfired. When Patricia tried getting my lake classified as protected wetland to block construction, the environmental groups she contacted became my strongest allies instead. Her desperation reached new lows. She started collecting signatures from elderly residents with dementia, getting them to sign documents they couldn't understand. Rumors spread about my violent tendencies because I'd once raised my voice when she interrupted my chainsaw work, but Wesley kept sharing Uncle Ray's stories. Your uncle was obsessed with old government surveys, he told me, the taste of his terrible coffee somehow getting worse each visit. Always claimed this lake had federal navigation protections from territorial days. Navigation protections? Wesley's grin suggested he knew more than he was saying. Laws from when Missouri was frontier territory. Any water that could float logs or canoes got special federal status. Ray swore this lake connected to the Missouri River through underground springs and seasonal creeks. While Patricia escalated her bureaucratic warfare, I kept studying Uncle Ray's government correspondence. What I was discovering would make her zoning complaints look like children's games. Patricia's desperation hit nuclear levels when she realized my fishing lodge wasn't just a threat. It was becoming her worst nightmare. Her next move proved she'd completely lost her mind. She filed emergency reports claiming my dock work was catastrophically undermining the historic dam structure. Historic my ass. That concrete spillway was poured in 1987 by Discount Dan's Construction, and it looked like they'd learned engineering from cereal box instructions. Critical infrastructure terrorism, she breathlessly told Fire Chief Bradley, her voice hitting octaves that could summon dolphins. Imminent navigation hazards for emergency vessels, complete collapse of community safety protocols. The stench of her desperation mixed with the fishy smell of summer algae blooms created an aroma that belonged in a horror movie. She was throwing accusations like a drunk throwing darts, wildly and without any concern for accuracy. Chief Bradley looked like a man forced to referee a fight between toddlers. "Ma'am, we've never had a single drowning incident on this lake. And frankly, Mr. Sullivan's improvements make emergency access easier, not harder." But Patricia had orchestrated something special, a piece of performance art that would have impressed method actors. Tuesday morning, I'm sipping coffee and watching mist rise off the water when sirens start screaming like the apocalypse had arrived. Patricia's shrieking about a catastrophic medical emergency at the gazebo. Paramedics, fire trucks, enough emergency vehicles to handle a plane crash. Except while Patricia was directing her Oscar-worthy performance, a real emergency unfolded 50 yards away. Jim Morrison, a kayaker from Kansas City, started having a genuine heart attack near the far shore. I could hear him gasping for help while everyone was mesmerized by Patricia's theatrical masterpiece. I jumped in my boat, hauled Jim to my dock, and started CPR while Patricia screamed about her imaginary crisis. My dock, the one she'd been trying to destroy, gave paramedics the stable platform they needed to save his life. Here's the beautiful twist. Local news crews showed up expecting to cover Patricia's emergency, and instead filmed me performing life-saving heroics. Local property owners' quick action save heart attack victim ran on every channel that night. Patricia's expression during those interviews was like watching someone realize they'd accidentally nominated their worst enemy for sainthood. But saving Jim's life created ripple effects Patricia couldn't control. The volunteer fire department officially requested permission to use my property for water rescue training. Environmental groups started calling about educational partnerships. The Missouri River Alliance wanted to feature my conservation efforts in their newsletter. More importantly, Jim's rescue forced me to dig deeper into Uncle Ray's government correspondence. If emergency services needed reliable lake access, I wanted to understand exactly what legal protections existed. Uncle Ray's letters with the Army Corps of Engineers went back 40 years. Page after page about federal navigation surveys and waterway classifications. What I dismissed as boring bureaucracy was actually legal dynamite. "Your uncle understood something most folks miss," Wesley explained over coffee that could strip paint. "This lake feeds Troublesome Creek through underground springs. Troublesome Creek connects to the Missouri River. That makes your entire lake part of the federal waterway system." My blood pressure spiked. Federal waterway system? Wesley's grin belonged in a high-stakes poker game. Navigable waters of the United States, protected under federal law since the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899. Can't be blocked, restricted, or privatized by anybody. Not HOAs, not cities, not even states. The implications detonated in my brain like controlled explosives. Patricia had been charging residents $600 annually to access waters that were legally required to remain public. Her locked gate, her access fees, her entire lake monopoly, all federal crimes. I hired structural engineer Mike Torres to document every improvement I'd made. His report read like a love letter. All modifications exceed federal safety standards and significantly enhance emergency response capability. I partnered officially with the fire department, opening doors to federal emergency preparedness grants Patricia couldn't touch, but the nuclear option was waiting in the Army Corps of Engineers database. When I searched historical waterway classifications, Lake Sullivan appeared on federal navigation charts dating back to territorial surveys. Patricia's pressure campaigns intensified as her desperation peaked. Anonymous complaints flooded every regulatory agency. She tried getting my contractor licenses revoked through Randolph's connections. Whisper campaigns about my environmental destruction reached state agencies, but the community was choosing sides decisively. Environmental groups celebrated my conservation leadership. Local veterans backed a union brother against HOA tyranny. Business owners openly rejected Patricia's economic blackmail. "You're making dangerous enemies," Patricia warned during one of her surveillance drives, her Escalade creeping past like a stalking predator. "The only dangerous thing here," I replied, cleaning fish while she watched, "is what happens when federal law meets local corruption." Her tires screamed against asphalt as she fled, probably planning her final desperate gambit. Uncle Ray's papers had revealed the nuclear option. Federal navigation law doesn't negotiate with HOA covenants. It obliterates them. The Federal Records Office in Kansas City smells like musty paper and forgotten secrets. Wesley and I hunched over metal tables surrounded by filing cabinets that probably held enough bureaucratic ammunition to start wars. 3 hours of digging through Uncle Ray's correspondence led us to a manila folder marked Critical Waterway Protections. My hands were trembling as I opened it. Inside, the 1847 Missouri Territorial Survey map. Lake Sullivan and associated tributaries hereby classified as navigable waterway for territorial commerce under federal jurisdiction. I read aloud, my voice echoing off concrete walls, connected via seasonal streams and underground springs to Troublesome Creek and Missouri River system. Wesley let out a whistle that could have summoned ghosts. "Son of a bitch, your uncle was sitting on a legal nuclear weapon." My brain was spinning. "What exactly does this mean?" "It means," Wesley said, pulling out reading glasses older than disco, "your lake has been federal water since before Missouri was even a state. Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899 protects navigable waters from any interference. Nobody, and I mean nobody, can block access, charge fees, or restrict navigation." The taste of victory was sweeter than Uncle Ray's bourbon. Patricia's 12 years of $600 annual fees weren't just theft, they were federal crimes. Every locked gate, every no trespassing sign, every threat she'd made violated laws older than her great-grandmother. But Wesley wasn't done destroying my worldview. He slapped down another document that made my heart stop, the original 1963 property deed between Patricia's great-grandfather Harold Blackwood and Uncle Ray. Page 3, buried in legal language like a landmine. Seller acknowledges and preserves in perpetuity federal navigation servitude and public waterway access rights as established by Territorial Survey 1847 and Rivers and Harbors Act 1899. I read it 3 times before the words sank in. Patricia's family knew. They've known for 60 years. "Her grandmother Margaret died in 2010, Wesley explained, his voice grim as winter. "Probably took the family secrets with her, except Patricia must have found these papers when settling the estate." The HOA formed in 2011, 1 year after Margaret's death. Patricia had discovered her family's legal obligations and decided to ignore them, banking on community ignorance and federal agency indifference. She'd built her entire neighborhood empire on deliberate federal crimes. Uncle Ray's obsessive record-keeping suddenly made perfect sense. Every letter to the Corps of Engineers, every survey response, every bureaucratic exchange, he'd been building a legal fortress against exactly what Patricia had attempted. Wesley explained federal navigation servitude like he was describing gravity. It's not negotiable. The government holds permanent, unshakable rights to waterway access that supersede all private property claims. These rights existed before Patricia's house, before her HOA, before her great-grandfather was born. Corps of Engineers doesn't play games, Wesley warned. When they enforce navigation law, local politics become completely irrelevant. The nuclear options lined up like dominoes in my mind. Immediate gate removal under federal authority. Criminal complaints for willful obstruction carrying $250,000 fines per violation. Civil rights lawsuits for systematic discrimination. Federal marshals enforcing public access. Patricia could face prison time for each year she'd obstructed federal waters. I thought about her daily surveillance, her harassment campaigns, her attempts to destroy my business. She'd been committing federal felonies while accusing me of trespassing on property my family had legally owned for decades. The beautiful irony made me laugh out loud, the sound bouncing off government walls like a celebration. Patricia had started this war to protect her illegal monopoly. Federal law would now obliterate not just her lake control, but her entire HOA operation. I gathered Uncle Ray's papers with hands steady as steel. Patricia wanted to play property rights games? She was about to learn that 200-year-old federal law doesn't negotiate with suburban tyrants. The Rivers and Harbors Act versus Patricia Blackwood's empire. Game over. Building a legal army to destroy Patricia's empire required recruiting the right generals. Wesley recommended Rebecca Martinez, a federal environmental lawyer whose office walls were covered with framed victory photos, dead shopping malls, stopped pipelines, and defeated municipal corruptions. The smell of strong coffee mixed with legal victory permeated everything. Federal navigation servitude cases are Christmas morning for environmental lawyers, Rebecca said, examining Uncle Ray's documents like she was studying the Hope Diamond. Government agencies hate admitting they've ignored violations for decades, but once you corner them, they unleash federal fury that makes hurricanes look gentle. The Army Corps of Engineers' Kansas City district office felt like entering a military bunker. Concrete walls, fluorescent lighting that could blind satellites, and bureaucrats who treated federal law like religious scripture. When I mentioned 12 years of Rivers and Harbors Act violations, suddenly I had meetings with District Engineer Colonel Patricia Webb, a woman whose handshake could crack walnuts. "This is prosecutorial-grade navigation obstruction," Webb declared, spreading my evidence across a conference table that probably cost more than my truck. Section 10 violations carrying criminal penalties, civil fines, and immediate enforcement authority. We've been looking for a case exactly like this. Dr. Sarah Remy from Missouri River Environmental Alliance practically levitated when I explained the conservation potential. Educational programming with federal waterway protection and renewable energy demonstration. We've got $200,000 in grants waiting for the right project. My union's civil rights attorney Marcus Thompson joined after hearing Patricia's economic discrimination tactics. Using HOA authority to target working-class property owners creates Section 1983 federal liability, he explained over lunch that tasted like justice. We can prosecute this from civil rights, environmental law, and criminal obstruction angles simultaneously. Rebecca outlined our strategy like a general planning D-Day. Phase 1, document every federal violation with forensic precision. Phase 2, coordinate Corps of Engineers enforcement action. Phase 3, public education campaign at HOA, annual meeting with federal agents present. Phase 4, permanent conservation easement protecting public access forever. Uncle Ray's research was becoming my secret weapon arsenal. He'd discovered that federal navigation servitude, the government's constitutional right to ensure waterway access, predates all private property rights by constitutional design. Supreme Court precedent from 1870 established that navigable water access exists regardless of surrounding land ownership, making Patricia's gate closure not just illegal, but constitutionally offensive. Rebecca prepared what she called the legal doomsday device, a quiet title action in federal court that would permanently establish waterway boundaries with constitutional authority. Federal court decree makes local property disputes legally extinct, she explained with a smile that belonged in Predator documentaries. Patricia's HOA becomes constitutionally irrelevant. But legal strategy was only half the battle. Community organizing was happening faster than Patricia could sabotage it. Secret meetings in my cabin brought together HOA residents who'd been documenting Patricia's financial abuse like underground resistance fighters. Eleanor Martinez had spreadsheets tracking every illegal fee increase over 12 years. Bob Remy possessed photographs of board members using restricted areas for private parties while charging residents for access. Janet Williams had audio recordings of Patricia threatening elderly residents who questioned board decisions. "We've been prisoners in our own neighborhood," Eleanor whispered, her hands shaking as she shared financial records. "Patricia's turned our community into her personal ATM machine." The volunteer fire department officially requested permanent water rescue training status, unlocking $150,000 in federal emergency preparedness grants. Environmental groups organized media campaigns about historical waterway significance. Local fishing guides and boat dealers formed coalitions supporting public access rights. Wesley coordinated what he called maximum impact timing with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. HOA annual meeting August 15th with mandatory resident attendance. 200-plus people trapped in one room. Federal enforcement action August 12th for maximum psychological pressure. Regional media alerted to federal law enforcement story. Union members organizing 100-plus support presence for backup muscle. Behind the scenes, Rebecca was constructing legal annihilation. FBI civil rights complaint filed and under investigation. Environmental Crimes Task Force reviewing Patricia's dam sabotage evidence. Corps of Engineers preparing violation notices carrying criminal referral recommendations. Federal prosecutors evaluating obstruction charges with prison time potential. The preparation details would have impressed NASA mission planners. Professional cameras documenting gate removal ceremony for evidence and publicity. Media information packets explaining federal waterway law in terms normal people could understand. Sheriff's Department coordinating with federal agents to prevent violence, multiple contingency plans for Patricia's inevitable desperate countermoves. I practiced chainsaw gate-cutting techniques while Rebecca coached media strategy. This story represents everything Americans hate about corruption, she explained. Federal law protecting working families against privileged bullies, environmental conservation versus suburban entitlement, constitutional rights defeating local political connections. My personal transformation was complete. 6 weeks ago, I'd been a heartbroken electrician seeking peaceful retirement. Now I was leading federal law enforcement action that would redefine waterway rights across Missouri and inspire similar actions nationwide. Uncle Ray's obsessive documentation had armed me with legal weapons Patricia couldn't comprehend, let alone counter. Federal law doesn't negotiate with suburban tyrants. August was coming. Patricia had no idea what federal fury looked like. Patricia's desperation crossed into full-blown criminal territory when she realized federal agencies weren't just investigating, they were building prosecution cases. Her next moves proved she'd completely lost any connection to reality or law. The dam sabotage happened at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. My security cameras caught Patricia's husband Randolph fumbling around the spillway with tools that looked stolen from a construction site. The infrared footage was beautiful. Him trying to pry open floodgates like a geriatric terrorist, probably thinking he could drain my lake and create an environmental emergency. What he actually created was federal evidence of infrastructure sabotage. The smell of his fear sweat was probably detectable from space as he realized those cameras were recording everything. Uncle Ray's paranoia about security systems had just documented domestic terrorism in high definition. Tampering with federal waterway infrastructure triggers domestic terrorism statutes under the Patriot Act, Rebecca explained when I showed her the footage over coffee that tasted like pure justice. 20-year federal sentences, no parole, no negotiation. But Patricia wasn't done digging her legal grave. She hired private security that belonged in a war zone, tactical gear, communications equipment, guys who looked like they'd been kicked out of actual military service for excessive aggression. They started patrolling public roads around my property, photographing visitors, following contractors to their homes. One plumber called me sobbing after security goons showed up at his kid's elementary school asking, "Questions about Daddy's new work friends?" Patricia had escalated from HOA president to domestic terrorist leader. Her restraining order application was pure fiction writing. She claimed I'd made terroristic threats during a conversation where I'd said good morning while checking my mailbox. Her sworn affidavit described me as a dangerous extremist with violent psychological disorders who was stockpiling weapons for revenge against community leaders. Judge Richardson read Patricia's creative writing with the expression of someone forced to judge a kindergarten lying contest. "Mr. Sullivan, did you threaten Mrs. Blackwood in any way?" "Your Honor, I asked if she was having a nice day. Apparently friendly conversation constitutes assault in her alternate reality." The restraining order died faster than Patricia's credibility. But here's the mini twist that made my entire month. Patricia's private army was so aggressive they started harassing federal agents conducting official investigations. Special Agent Maria Davis from the FBI Environmental Crimes Unit called me laughing like someone who'd won the lottery. "Mr. Sullivan, your neighbor's security team just tried to detain me for suspicious activity while I was photographing federal evidence. They demanded identification from an FBI agent conducting an official federal investigation. Patricia had accidentally declared war on the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They're opening additional case files for obstruction of federal investigation and interference with law enforcement," Agent Davis continued. "Your neighbor just upgraded from local nuisance to federal criminal enterprise." While Patricia's paranoia reached psychotic levels, I was building media relationships with investigative reporter Jennifer Walsh from the Kansas City Star. Jennifer had been tracking HOA corruption across Missouri for years and recognized the bigger story. "This isn't just property disputes," Jennifer explained during our interview. "This is federal law enforcement versus suburban organized crime, environmental protection against commercial fraud, constitutional rights defeating political corruption." I was learning the art of strategic patience while Patricia's empire collapsed around her. Every desperate move created more federal evidence. Every threat, every harassment incident, every criminal act was being documented by agencies that specialized in sending people to federal prison for decades. The community transformation was accelerating beyond Patricia's control. Environmental groups filed formal federal complaints supporting my conservation efforts. Veterans organizations organized public rallies backing a union brother against harassment. Regional outdoor recreation businesses formed coalitions supporting waterway access rights. She threatened to destroy my boat rental business if I supported you, marina owner Tom Rodriguez told me while we watched kids fishing from my dock. I told her federal law trumps HOA threats every single time. Patricia's most desperate gambit was attempting to sell HOA common areas to commercial developers for emergency legal fund money. She needed cash for private security and lawyer fees, so she tried auctioning the gazebo, picnic areas, and boat launch facilities. Except every single asset she was selling sat on my property, making her sale attempts federal fraud in addition to everything else. Attempting to sell federal waterway access while under FBI investigation demonstrates either complete stupidity or total psychological breakdown, Rebecca observed with professional admiration. Either way, it strengthens our RICO prosecution recommendations. August was approaching like divine judgment. Patricia's harassment campaigns intensified while federal task forces prepared enforcement actions. Death threats appeared in my mailbox, misspelled ones that probably came from her supporters. Private security followed me everywhere like incompetent stalkers. But I was ready. Uncle Ray's federal paperwork had armed me with constitutional weapons Patricia couldn't comprehend. Federal law doesn't negotiate with suburban terrorists. Patricia's final 2 weeks resembled the death throes of a wounded dictator whose empire was collapsing in real time. Her desperation had reached levels that would have been hilarious if they weren't so criminally insane. Her nuclear option was selling the entire HOA to Midwest Development Corporation for $2.8 million in emergency cash. Not just common areas, the whole organization, including perpetual lake access rights and community governance authority. The smell of her panic mixed with August heat created an aroma like rotting ambition. Emergency fiscal measures require decisive leadership, Patricia announced at a board meeting where only 2 members showed up. Resident consultation would delay critical community preservation. Except Patricia was trying to sell an organization that didn't own what it claimed to control. To developers whose lawyers immediately discovered federal waterway protections made the entire deal legally impossible. "Ma'am," Midwest's attorney explained during a phone call I accidentally overheard through thin walls, "you can't sell rights to federal water. That's like trying to sell the Mississippi River." Patricia's backup plan was even more spectacular. A federal court injunction to prevent my gate removal, claiming imminent community destruction through terrorist waterway manipulation. Her legal filing was 23 pages of pure fiction describing me as an environmental extremist using federal agencies to destroy American communities. She claimed my conservation efforts were cover for anti-government activism designed to eliminate private property rights. Federal Judge Catherine Morrison needed exactly 47 seconds to dismiss Patricia's injunction with prejudice and sanctions. Frivolous litigation wasting federal resources will result in personal liability for plaintiffs' attorney fees, the order stated. But Patricia's masterpiece was organizing what she called community self-defense action against federal overreach. Picture this nightmare. Patricia arriving at my dock with 8 elderly residents, 3 private security guards, and actual handcuffs she'd ordered online. The taste of her desperation was stronger than the fish I was cleaning when this circus appeared. "Garrett Sullivan, you're under citizen's arrest for theft of community waterway," she declared, reading from index cards like a nervous school play performer. I looked up from filleting bass, knife still in hand. "Patricia, you can't arrest someone on their own property for owning their own property. Federal conspiracy against community rights is treason." "Interesting theory," I replied, waving a document Rebecca had prepared. "The FBI has interesting theories, too. About 12 years of your fee collection crimes." Here's the mini twist that obliterated Patricia's last hope. Her own board members had been secretly recording everything for months. Vice President Eleanor Martinez contacted Rebecca with audio evidence of Patricia discussing eliminating the Sullivan problem through any means necessary, including potential arson and physical assault. Board members had been documenting Patricia's criminal conspiracy while pretending loyalty. "She's completely lost her mind," Eleanor whispered during a clandestine meeting at my cabin, playing recordings that sounded like mob boss conversations. "Last week, she suggested hiring people to accidentally damage your solar panels with baseball bats." The evidence was devastating beyond imagination. Not just financial fraud, Patricia had been planning actual violence while using HOA meetings to organize criminal conspiracies. Audio recordings captured her discussing community defense measures that sounded like domestic terrorism planning sessions. Rebecca coordinated the federal response like a symphony of justice. Environmental Crimes Task Force preparing multiple criminal referrals. Corps of Engineers issuing violation notices carrying immediate enforcement authority, FBI Domestic Terrorism Unit reviewing conspiracy evidence, federal prosecutors drafting RICO indictments for organized criminal enterprise. Patricia's operation meets every federal definition of criminal conspiracy, Rebecca explained with professional satisfaction. Extortion, fraud, civil rights violations, infrastructure sabotage, and now domestic terrorism planning. We're recommending prosecution under federal organized crime statutes. The community transformation was complete. Over 200 residents signed declarations supporting federal waterway protection. Environmental groups organized national media campaigns featuring my conservation success story. Local businesses formed protective coalitions against HOA economic terrorism. She threatened to destroy my family's hardware business if we supported you, owner Mike Peterson told me while personally delivering supplies. I told her federal law protects citizens from HOA retaliation, and if she wanted war, she'd picked the wrong enemy. Patricia's final desperate weeks involved threatening individual residents with personal destruction lawsuits for community betrayal conspiracy. She filed papers against elderly neighbors who'd attended my educational events, trying to terrorize them into submission with bankruptcy threats. But her ammunition was exhausted. Patricia's legal bills had consumed the entire HOA treasury plus her personal savings. Randolph faced federal terrorism charges for dam sabotage. Private security abandoned her when paychecks bounced repeatedly. August 15th approached like biblical judgment day. Federal agencies coordinated enforcement like a military operation. Corps of Engineers agents positioned for ceremonial gate removal. FBI investigators ready with criminal complaint service. Environmental task force prepared for national media briefings. Patricia made desperate final calls to political connections who suddenly developed amnesia about their friendship. County commissioners, zoning board members, country club associates, everyone frantically distancing themselves from federal criminal investigations. I spent evenings practicing remarks for the annual meeting while Rebecca finalized prosecution recommendations that would send Patricia to federal prison for decades. She'd started this war to protect illegal profits. Federal law was ending it with constitutional authority. Game over. The Willowbrook Community Center had never hosted a public execution before, but August 15th came pretty close. Over 350 people crammed into a space designed for 150, with overflow crowds pressed against windows like spectators at a gladiator match. The smell of nervous sweat mixed with industrial coffee and righteous anger created an atmosphere you could taste. Patricia sat at the head table like Napoleon on Elba, flanked by the two remaining board members still dumb enough to support her. Behind her, federal agents lined the walls like an honor guard of justice. FBI Special Agent Maria Davis, Corps of Engineers Colonel Patricia Webb, and Environmental Crimes Director Sarah Remy occupied front row seats to witness Patricia's public annihilation. News crews from every major Missouri outlet packed the back, cameras ready to broadcast Patricia's downfall statewide. This wasn't an HOA meeting, it was federal law enforcement theater with live television coverage. This emergency session will address illegal federal interference in legitimate community governance, Patricia began, her voice trembling like a chihuahua in a thunderstorm. The whine on her breath was detectable from 3 rows back. I stood up slowly, federal documents in hand, and smiled like a man holding royal flush. Actually, Patricia, this meeting is about ending 12 years of your criminal enterprise. The room went dead silent, except for camera shutters clicking like mechanical applause. Special Agent Davis stepped forward, badge reflecting fluorescent lights like a beacon of justice. Mrs. Patricia Blackwood, you're being served federal violation notices for willful obstruction of navigable waterways, systematic civil rights violations, and criminal conspiracy under RICO statutes. Patricia's face cycled through colors that belonged in a medical emergency textbook. This is federal harassment. Constitutional community rights are protected by following federal law instead of breaking it, Colonel Webb interrupted, her military bearing making Patricia look like a tantrum-throwing toddler. Your illegal gate has obstructed federal waters for 12 years. Immediate removal is non-negotiable. Here's where I delivered the mic drop moment that would echo through Missouri legal history. I pulled out Uncle Ray's 1847 territorial survey and spread it across the overhead projector for everyone to see. The ancient map filled the wall like a constitutional proclamation. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, my voice carrying to every corner of that packed room, this lake has been federal navigable water since 1847, 24 years before Patricia's great-great-grandmother was even born. She's been charging you $600 annually to access waters that belong to every American citizen by constitutional right. Patricia Blackwood has been running a 12-year criminal conspiracy to steal your money for access to your own federal waterway. The explosion of rage was seismic. 12 years of suppressed fury erupted as 350-plus residents realized they'd been systematically robbed by their own elected representative. $7,200! Eleanor Martinez screamed, waving bank statements. My family paid $7,200 over 12 years for lake access that was always constitutionally free. She bought a Cadillac with our money, Bob Remy shouted, his face red with decades of accumulated anger. While fining us for using our own community property? Rebecca Martinez approached the microphone with surgical precision. Federal investigation has documented systematic embezzlement totaling $427,000 in stolen HOA funds, plus $127,000 in illegal waterway access fees, plus attempted fraud in selling federal property to private developers. Patricia made one last desperate attempt at control. These are treasonous lies. Federal communist conspiracy against American property rights. The only conspiracy, Environmental Director Remy interrupted with Arctic authority, is the criminal enterprise we've documented through audio recordings, financial fraud evidence, and security footage of your husband's domestic terrorism attempts. The crowd transformed into an angry mob when residents learned about Patricia's recorded conversations planning arson against my property. Parents whose children had learned to fish at my dock, veterans who'd supported conservation efforts, elderly residents Patricia had threatened with bankruptcy lawsuits for attending my educational events. You plan to burn down his cabin, Janet Williams sobbed, her voice breaking with betrayal. We have recordings of you discussing arson while we trusted you with our community. Patricia's complete psychological breakdown was spectacular. She started shrieking about federal tyranny destroying American communities, while agents prepared restraints for her inevitable arrest. But the moment everyone was waiting for finally arrived. Colonel Webb officially authorized immediate removal of the federal navigation obstruction. I walked outside with bolt cutters while 350-plus people followed like a liberation parade. Every news camera in Missouri captured the symbolic moment as I approached the gate that had started this constitutional war. By authority of the United States Army Corps of Engineers, federal navigation law, and the constitutional rights of American citizens, I announced, raising those bolt cutters like Excalibur, this 12-year criminal obstruction ends today. The metallic snap echoed across the water like a liberty bell. Patricia's empire of theft and harassment died with one satisfying cut that freed waters that had been stolen from the American people. The celebration was audible from space. Children ran through the open gate to their constitutionally protected lake. Veterans saluted justice. Parents wept with relief. Patricia's final desperate rush toward the fallen gate ended with federal handcuffs and obstruction charges carrying 20-year sentences. Constitutional law had crushed suburban tyranny. Federal justice had defeated local corruption. One electrician with Uncle Ray's paperwork had liberated an entire community. 18 months later, Patricia Blackwood was serving federal time for obstruction of navigation, civil rights violations, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Her husband Randolph got 2 years for domestic terrorism charges. The federal judge called their operation a criminal enterprise disguised as community governance. But justice was just getting started. The HOA was forced to refund every penny of those illegal lake access fees. $127,000 returned to residents who'd been robbed for 12 years. Patricia's personal assets, including that ridiculous Hopres Escalade, were seized for restitution. Her foreclosed house sold at auction for legal fees that consumed her entire retirement. Sweet, sweet justice. My property transformed into something Uncle Ray would have loved beyond measure. Federal designation as Sullivan Conservation Area brought permanent protection under Missouri Department of Conservation Management. Property values increased 60%, but more importantly, the lake would remain free and accessible forever. The community healing was remarkable. We dissolved Patricia's corrupt HOA and formed the Willowbrook Environmental Stewardship Association with me as conservation director. Instead of harassment and illegal fees, we focus on education, wildlife protection, and constitutional rights advocacy. Our annual Federal Waterway Heritage Festival draws over 3,000 visitors celebrating constitutional law and environmental conservation. Children catch their first base while learning about navigation rights that protect every American. Environmental law students study our case as the gold standard for grassroots legal action. The personal transformation surprised me most. Divorce had left me broken and directionless, but fighting corruption gave me purpose I'd never imagined. Uncle Ray's legacy lives on through waters that will remain constitutionally protected for centuries. Our victory inspired federal investigations in 23 states. Communities from Oregon to Florida use our case as a blueprint for defeating municipal corruption. The Corps of Engineers strengthened enforcement based on lessons learned from Patricia's 12-year crime spree. Legal precedent from our federal court victory helps property owners nationwide fight HOA overreach using constitutional law. Rebecca Martinez built a national practice representing communities against corrupt local governments. My proudest achievement is the Uncle Ray Waterway Rights Education Scholarship, $75,000 annually for environmental law students, funded by our lawsuit settlement. Partnership with tribal colleges honors Native American waterway heritage while training the next generation of constitutional advocates. Practical knowledge from our fight helps thousands research federal waterway protections in their own communities. The Corps created online databases making historical surveys accessible to ordinary citizens. Free legal clinics teach people how to identify constitutional protections bureaucrats hope they'll never discover. Wesley now coordinates the Missouri Historical Property Rights Foundation, helping communities audit government corruption. Eleanor Martinez leads financial transparency training for HOA residents. Environmental groups across America reference our victory when fighting local water privatization schemes. 1 year later, kids who learned to fish from my dock are teaching their friends about constitutional rights. Veterans hold annual ceremonies celebrating individual citizens who fight tyranny using law instead of violence. Environmental science programs use our lake as a living classroom for sustainable stewardship. Patricia's downfall became required reading in government ethics courses. Local officials receive mandatory federal law training. HOA candidates must complete constitutional rights education before taking office. The simple fishing dock that started this war now hosts constitutional law seminars where citizens learn that federal rights protect everyone equally. The smell of clean water mixed with children's laughter creates memories that honor Uncle Ray's patient lessons about verifying everything and trusting authority, never. Every sunrise over protected waters reminds me that one person with proper documentation can defeat institutional corruption. Constitutional law doesn't care about political connections, economic status, or how long you've been getting away with crimes. Federal law protects everyone. You just need courage to use it. As I finish this story, we're investigating our next case. City Council condemned Veterans Farm for private golf course until we found his family's 1862 Homestead Act mineral rights that can never be legally transferred. That federal case should be spectacular. Share your HOA horror stories in the comments. I read every single one, and your experiences help other communities recognize corruption and fight back using constitutional law that actually works. If you want more stories about ordinary Americans defeating corrupt systems with laws that protect constitutional rights, subscribe to Karen's Stories and smash that notification bell. We're building a community of citizens who understand that federal law doesn't negotiate with local tyrants. The Constitution belongs to everyone. Sometimes you just need to remind corrupt officials that constitutional rights aren't suggestions. They're the supreme law of the land, and constitutional law always wins.